Good evening, everybody. I'm Bryce Wild, joined by Dr. Laura Varden and Justin Harrison. Are we excited? I'm excited. You
Oh,
guys
very
excited
much so.
Oh,
to
we're
dive?
excited. We're
This is,
calorie deficient and we're ready to go.
which is sometimes painful for some people, right? But we're going to dive into it. One of the most powerful tools, in fact, I think we all agree, for health optimization, fasting. But it's not just about skipping meals, right? And or even the window. It's hardwired into our DNA. That's the topic that we specialize in. Genomic variation, and it's a survival mechanism, right, from our ancestors who thrived by cycling between fast and famine. But today, with all kinds of food available to us, refined carbohydrates, sugars, cakes, cookies, donuts, pastas, breads, we all love to eat it. And what we refer to as the standard American diet, the SAD by acronym, SAD, SAD diet. Our genetic blueprint is out of sync and it leads to metabolic dysfunction and what we refer to as the obesity epidemic. But tonight, we're going to break down what fasting can and can't do, how genes like FTO, TCF7L2, ApoA, 2MC4R, et cetera, influence your fasting success, and why personalized testing is the future of metabolic health. And again, guys, some people thrive on extended fasts. Others struggle due to their genetic variations, affecting everything from fat metabolism, hunger, stress tolerance, sleep-wake cycles. You know, we all know it well. We're going to share this with everyone who's joining us tonight. And thank you for doing so. And particularly how genetic testing can help you fast smarter by guiding you towards what you eat within the macronutrients and even micronutrients world. So let's all together avoid these common mistakes. We're going to give you the tools to make fasting work for your unique biology. But before we get started, as per usual, we want to hear from you, and we do that by our poll. So fill it out. Tell us about your personal fasting experience, your biggest concerns, what you're most interested in learning. And if you haven't already, we're also super excited about the new DNA app. Download it. It's on Apple, it's for Android. You can unlock your own personalized health recommendations, including fasting, you know, nutrition, supplements, hormones, methylation, so much more. The app is your personal owner's manual to health, tailored to your DNA. Even if you haven't done our 360, but you've done Ancestry or 23andMe, you can ingest that. It'll give you partial results. Ours is better, but it'll give you somewhat results to work with to add vitality and enhance your overall experience, even with topics like fasting. So let's dive in. Let's start. What is going on, moving and shaking in your worlds? I know fasting like a girl's been popularized, Dr. Varden, by the work of Dr. Mandy Peltz. You've interviewed her, haven't you? Or at least are very familiar with her work.
Yes. And actually, when we did a webinar, a summit with her, we did the Fast Like a Girl Summit. Cash Khan actually did that with her. And at the end, there was a open question and answer session after the summit. And I actually did that with her.
Very
Brilliant
cool.
woman. I mean, really has helped so many. And, you know, if you get a chance, read her books, take a look. I mean, it's great. She actually has some things that are directed for women during menopause, but she
Right.
really takes it through, hormones and how that affects fasting. When is the best time to fast, when it comes to your cycle, when it can be a little more difficult as compared to being a little bit easier. So
Right. So we
definitely.
appreciate the variation between XX and XY, but the story's deeper. I mean, that's to be appreciated, gender specific fasting. But we really want to talk about and unpack the ideation around genomic variations, and as it pertains to sort of what has set the standard for how our ancestors were most able to do and were most adapted to do. So, besides the male female gender story, Justin, I know you're a huge fan of the whole idea around Paleolithic, eat like our ancestors ate. But why? I mean, if we're going to template that, what would we talk to folks joining us tonight about why that makes sense, generally speaking? And then we'll talk about the obvious genomic variations that make us unique.
You know, through all of human history, we ate and then we didn't eat. right? To Dr. Wild's point, we had these feast and famine cycles going on all the time. So we have times when we have an abundance of calories, and that triggers anabolic activity in the body. It has to be balanced out with AMP kinase pathways, and you have to have those catabolic periods as well so that your body can regenerate, restore, and clean itself out, right? So we have feast cycles, we have famine cycles, and it's always been that way. Up until very recently in human history, we didn't have an abundance of calories on every street corner, right? So we had to sort of go out and hunt it or pick it, gather it, get it ourselves. So we were actually expending calories in a fasted state all the time. So our body has this elegant ability to sort of shift between energy substrates when we don't have anything available and produce ketones and even make its own glucose so that we have a little bit of energy to hunt and to gather, etc. So this is definitely an ancestral mechanism. And once again, I believe that we've disrupted it with this never-ending abundance of calories, especially sad calories, because they're not good quality calories in the first place.
I love that he just right out of the gate, Dr. Varden starts throwing around acronyms like AMP kinase and the metabolic cycle. For some of us newbies that are joining us, what the heck is AMP kinase? Because I know you're the queen of biochemistry. This activated protein kinase, I think, is what it stands for. What's that doing for us?
Well, when it comes to the AMP, which is short for activated protein kinase pathway, this really is the master energy sensor. Excuse me. It's really important, this enzyme, as it serves as that, again, master regulator of cellular energy balance, plays a very central role in maintaining that metabolic homeostasis by sensing energy levels and then responding accordingly. So, when energy is low, this is where the AMPK is activated to increase energy production and decrease energy consumption. So this makes it a key player in like mitochondrial function, fat metabolism, glucose regulation, and longevity. So, I mean, it is activated when cells detect low energy, meaning like the ATP, adenosine triphosphate, okay, the energy currency of the cells. When those are low, that's when the AMPK is activated. And high AMP, this is adenosine monophosphate levels, okay? So when those levels are high, ATP is low, it says, hey, we need energy. There's a deficiency here. And this can happen, due to exercising, fasting, calorie restriction, people who might be on ketogenic diets, low carb diets, and also certain nutrients and supplements can trigger this. Things like berberine, metformin, quercetin, resveratrol. So really it's a matter of when AMPK is activated, increasing energy production, it stimulates glucose uptake into the cells. It's a good thing. Enhances fatty acid oxidation, fat burning. Also encourages mitochondrial biogenesis. This is really, basically, it's a matter of the mitochondria. Okay, they're the powerhouses of the cell and energy sensors of the cell. It makes them more efficient for energy production.
Right.
And then it also helps to reduce energy expenditure. It inhibits the fatty acid and cholesterol synthesis, suppresses protein synthesis, these things that are energy intensive.
Right. So when food was scarce for our ancestors, it's my understanding AMPK would activate, signaling the body basically to burn fat for fuel instead of relying on sugar, which was really limited, which is why the paleo diet emphasizes eat like our ancestors ate, which was primarily meat, fish when it was available, roots, nuts, seeds, and berries. And it essentially told the body, we're low right now on energy, so stop storing fat, stop growing, start using what we have to survive, And or as you mentioned, let's clean out old or damaged cells. This process called autophagy, which we'll get into, which I think is really, frankly, one of the primary reasons to consider, at the very least, intermittent fasting. And then that, of course, is to, not just kill off the, senescent cells before they get rogue and do weird things like cancer, but to free up more resources and keep the body running efficiently, right? So, but these fasting protocols, let's get into the variations of them out there, like the intermittent fasting, prolonged fasting. And again, we're talking about differences and variations in genetic aptitude, but essentially, bottom line, they're helping to restore metabolic flexibility. That's what science is currently at least understanding, to regulate hunger hormones, leptin, adiponectin, ghrelin, and activate cellular repair mechanisms. What are some of the ones that you're differentiating between, Jess, when you're making these recommendations to your clients as a functional genomic practitioner?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways that you can go about it. And really, anytime that I recommend fasting, be it time restricted eating, which just means that within one day you're sort of compressing the window, or an actual fast, being, a 2-day fast up to a 7-day fast. I've never actually recommended that to anyone, not without modification, because I think there's some room for error there. But I usually start a little bit more on the simple side if they've never done it before, right? Because we need to remember that we're talking about hormesis here. And if you're not familiar with that concept, this is hormetic stress, right? So fasting is actually stressful to an extent on the body. And if you don't do it right, you can raise stress hormones, which actually triggers catabolic activity in the body, maybe to a level that you don't really desire. So exercise is hormesis. Fasting is hormesis. Cold exposure is hormesis. Heat exposure, hormesis. These are great things that trigger positive adaptations in the body, but overdoing it can really have a lot of downsides that we need to be aware of. So I'll typically honestly recommend like a 12 and 12 strategy to start out with, just to keep it simple, right? Most people go to bed for, let's say, 8 hours anyway. So you've already accomplished that. We just need to push that first meal back another few hours. And there you go. We're in a 12 and 12. You're going to get a bit of the benefit. The microbiome is going to clear out a little bit. You're going to get the start of some fat burning and some positive adaptations, but it's pretty easy to still hit your protein target in a 12-hour eating window. You're still going to be nourished, right? We're not pushing the body too far into a catabolic state. So that's a great starting point. And then 16 and 8, right? 16 and 8 is really common one. So that's you're fasting for 16 hours and then you're eating within an 8-hour window. And that's pretty easy to accomplish as well. Most people would modify it a tad with a coffee and some electrolytes and whatever, but pretty simple still. Then we get into things like OMAD, right? OMAD, 1 meal a day. To me, there's times when that's appropriate if you're really trying to lose weight, but we need to be careful that you don't go too far with that, because if you don't get enough protein in because you're only eating one time a day, ultimately sarcopenia, which is like muscle loss, can start to come about, right? So I really try to tailor it to a person, because let's say you're a hard charging 2-a-day athlete. I don't think you should be doing a heck of a lot of fasting because the expenditure is simply so great. Or if you're already underweight, right? We all have patients that are underweight. I'm not going to say you should take a 4-day fast if you're already struggling to keep muscle mass on, right? Or for example, if you're in puberty, I don't think that it's appropriate for you to do a lot of fasting when you're in that growth phase of your life, right? So we need to kind of tailor it and respect where you're at with your place in life as well.
Tailoring, name of the game, customization, genetic informed. In the findings just last year presented at the American Heart Association's scientific sessions or some annual gathering, they have actually reviewed all of the various sciences out there. And here's the point, folks, is that individuals adhering to the standard 8-hour eating window had a 91% higher. So risk of cardiovascular death compared to those who ate over a 12 to 16-hour period. So this association was actually really notable around individuals with pre-existing heart disease or cancer. It's not one size fits all. There's contradictions in some of these rules, just like Mandy Peltz's fasting for a girl, depending on where you are in your cycle. That's what we're here for. Fasting speeds up metabolism, right, Dr. Varden? I mean, if we're talking about fasting myths and we're debunking some or supporting others, why essentially, does this work for some but slow down for others? This is the misnomer, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And it really comes down to the genes. I mean, there are certain genes that people have that, depending on the variants, can impact, their ability to get benefits or not get benefits, or the type of their experience with
Yeah.
fasting. Okay. So, we're talking about genes, and actually, I believe you might have mentioned a little bit of it. We're talking about genes like the FTO gene. Okay. That's your fat storage gene. The TCF7L2, this is the insulin relating to insulin sensitivity. MC4R gene, this is for appetite regulation. Your fat metabolism genes like ApoA2, all of these can impact how someone can experience fasting and whether it works well for them or whether it doesn't. So, I mean, it really is a matter of, also, well, I do have to say, it's also a matter of what is the person's experience? Have they ever fasted before? I love how Justin eases into it, starts off, okay, if fasting is indicated, they would like to try it, they would like to get some of the benefits, start with something that they can do. That 12 and 12 is really actually not too difficult. And being monitored and then starting to shift. But we have to train our bodies for what is to come because it's not used to it. We don't live in a society like our ancestors did, where there's that feast and famine. So preparing the body for that can start awakening the mitochondria, the cells going, oh, okay, wait a minute, this isn't our typical ongoings. Let's see what's going on. And we start clearing the old senescent cells, the mitochondria that are not working as well. We want to clear those away to make them more alert, to make them more sensitive to changes, so they'll be on the ball and make those changes. And that really is the precipitous of getting to be metabolically flexible. And I want to give a little insight or explain, what does metabolically flexible mean? Really, the bottom line is your body being able to use fat for fuel as easily as it does glucose.
Bingo.
I mean, bottom line, that's what it is. But we have to retrain our bodies that
Well, and some people do it better than
do it.
others. So as Justin alluded to earlier as well, I mean, even if you do that better than average, and that's for the DNA 360 to decide for you, and it's a one and done test, best money you've ever spent, is because the ratio of macros count, and you don't want to get muscle, you don't want to entertain the idea of losing muscle, the only real metabolic or primary metabolic tissue in the body. And of course, again, I'm just going to reiterate this for everybody. Fasting worked so well for our ancestors because their environment, as you were describing, Dr. Varden, and as you said, Justin, was perfectly aligned with that natural fast and famine cycle. They had the metabolic flexibility, not because they desired it. Frankly, the desire, controlled by the hormones in the brain, this is the leptin, adiponectin, ghrelin that I was talking about earlier, was conducive to their environment. They were stressed and they were, just naturally adapted. But if they had access to one of our grocery stores, they would not also know how to control that urge to continue to eat. So that today's modern world, that flexibility is diminished. The alignment's been disrupted, and it makes fasting even more complex and even sometimes less effective for a lot of folks where they contain these genes that basically just are not conducive. MC4R as one example. What the heck is that one, Justin? What is that doing for us?
MC4R is actually a satiety signal that exists at the level of the palate in the mouth, right? Because ancestrally speaking, I mean, we would have been wired to seek out different sources. You stumble upon an apple tree and a little bit of fructose. You find an animal, protein and fat. it makes sense that we would be wired to find, nuts and fruit and veggies and animals, and therefore we actually have, as a trickle down effect, genes that kind of reflect that. And I think that really speaks to this whole concept of metabolic flexibility, because were we lost in the woods effectively, which is what our ancestors were, and we did stumble upon, a bush filled with berries, at no point will we be like, well, I'm on a ketogenic diet, so I can't have that fruit right now. That's just not for me, right? We would have had it, and there wouldn't have been any metabolic consequence to it, because our body is really designed to be able to use fructose when there's fructose, get some glucose from protein when we have lots of protein, make ketones if there's just no food at all, right? That's metabolic flexibility, the capacity to get energy from any given substrate without consequence. So we're really designed in that way. And to your point, if we're just constantly downing breads and different things, we've totally disrespected and down-regulated that mechanism. So it really makes a lot of sense that fasting would be a great tool to help restore metabolic flexibility modern day.
A lot of which is mind over matter, a lot of which is also genetically, variant in people. Like, we all have different abilities to manage cravings. It's not just blood glucose levels. It's very much mind over matter. So constant access to food, no longer experiencing any real true food scarcity. There's, everywhere. And at the touch of a cell phone button, it's to your front door in 15 minutes. That's crazy. The standard American diet, right? The SAD diet we refer to, impaired fat metabolism. And that's really largely because we can't even, our body becomes inefficient when we overconsume at using sugar, for that matter, right? We can't access fat stores over sugar, and our insulin's insensitive. So we can talk about that. And then, sedentary lifestyles, right? Consumption. And, like, I know a lot of people like to argue it's all about micronutrients, then micronutrient density. You know what? We still appreciate calories in, calories out. There is a science to this. And of course, micronutrient deficiencies count for a huge percent of this, because you can be bang on or even just under for your macros. You can be fasting, but you could also still be hormonally imbalanced and or gaining weight because of nutrient deficiencies, micronutrient deficiencies. Dr. Varden, do you want to take the honor to summarize and deliver our poll this evening?
Oh, I would love to, if our IT angels can bring that up. Beautiful. Thank you. So, and first of all, thank you everyone for filling out the poll. We really do appreciate this. This allows us to tailor the information that we provide for you. So our first question, what is your experience with fasting? And it looks like the majority of you, almost 50%, said, I fast regularly and it works well for me. Fantastic. I happen to be in that group too. I really enjoy fasting. And we've got almost an even split with the next two at around 25%. I have tried fasting but didn't see any results, and I have never tried fasting but am curious. And then we've got 4% of you that think that fasting is overhyped. So, and honestly, I agree. I think sometimes it certainly can be, but when you really start understanding the science, the evolutionary biology of it, that it's really not necessarily about hype. It is what it is. It's just not eating. So, for question 2, we have, what is your main reason for considering fasting? And here, definitely, the majority of you said longevity and anti-aging. Then the next runner-up was digestive health and detox. Then we have about an even split with weight loss and increased energy and focus. And again, only 3% of you said, I have not tried fasting yet. And our last question, what are you most interested in learning about fasting? And actually, most of you said the best fasting strategies for my body type. Well, you're in the right place, and you're gathering the correct information by getting your genes and knowing the functional pathways of those genes. Then followed that up, we've got how to know if fasting is actually right for me. And that's in at 64%. And then the other two, we've got at 44%, whether fasting really improves longevity. And then our last at 37%, how fasting impacts weight loss and metabolism.
That's very cool. You know, I love that the poll shows the reasons, at least our current population, why folks are interested in fasting based on the breakdown, longevity and aging at 68%, digestive health detox a little bit less at 55%, and then weight loss coming in at third, when that's really for most, used to be for most people, why they would do something like this. But most people, I think, view fasting as a tool for long-term health and disease prevention now. And I think that's a really nice change and flip of the switch with, again, longevity being the top goal. By doing and having all of these results from this intermittent fasting suited to you and customized to you, digest health, weight loss, that all comes. And most of the research, by the leading up to this point, where we are at 2025, comes from an uncomfortable reduction in overall throughout the day calories, right? I mean, most of these were animal studies, hard to starve people. 300 calories reduction, which is not comfortable, allows an animal probably 5% addition on their life average, which is what the research shows. But we're not talking necessarily at all about hypocalorism or low calorie intake. We're talking about a fasting window. I just want to drive that message home, that we're not necessarily, if your caloric demands are, let's say you're a 6 foot tall, 180-pound male, are roughly 2,000 calories, that the fasting window and the macros are going to allow you to achieve that 2,000 calories. It's just the eating window. So I thought that was something important to point out. But I love how people have sort of flipped the switch around. It's really tertiary for this group anyways, that weight loss, which is a great side benefit. Imagine consuming the same amount of calories in your day, but in a very specific allotment, the right calories for you based on your genes, and you're still losing weight. Beautiful. But why does that happen, Justin? What's going on? Like, why are we consuming the same amount of rough calories, but yet we're also losing weight? What's going on?
There's a few things going on, right? Because fasting does have a few benefits with regard to hormonal regulation, right? And this is where it needs to be a little bit personalized, because for some people, fasting does turn into a bit of a cortisol heavy practice, because we don't want to give your body too much scarcity signals either, right? At some point, we want to give your body abundant signals. So that's why I refer to this as a balancing act, because this is a hormetic stressor. To your point, I could achieve a surplus in an 8-hour eating window if I really wanted to. I could achieve a deficit without fasting if I really wanted to, right? This is why working with a coach helps, because you just get on a structured meal plan and it's going to work one way or another. Usually with fasting, though, you get a little amplification of things like growth hormone and testosterone, which in and of themselves do help with body composition, right? They help to sort of maintain muscle mass, and they tend to improve metabolic rate a little bit hormonally. I'm not saying fasting increases metabolic rate, but hormonal switches can improve your body composition because of that. So it's really about having the right type of fasting and really doing it in a way that is going to work for you. So I'll share a couple of strategies that I've used for this. Like, if I'm going to prolong my fast, sometimes I'll use essential amino acids right in the middle of it, right? Because there's no calories to that. So it doesn't technically break a fast, but you're giving your muscles that little bit of support, that anabolic support mid fast. Or if you're aiming for the digestive benefits, you could do a bone broth fast. Instead of just a water fast, you could have a little bit of broth right in the middle of it. There's a tad bit of collagen to it, and you're actually going to increase the digestive benefits, and you're also not giving your body too much of a scarcity signal there. So I think that modifying and doing it right means that you're going to get the appropriate adjustments in your body composition. If you do it wrong and you spiked your cortisol, which will in fact spike your blood sugar in the middle of a fast, well, now we've negated some of those benefits, right? So you've got to know your genes, you've got to know your body. And then honestly, I recommend working with someone to get the right plan for you. Maybe it's 12 and 12, maybe it's alternate day fasting. There's so many ways to skin a cat with this one.
Sure.
And I think it really depends on what are your goals.
Yeah.
There's different types of fasting. I mean, if you are looking for a gut rest, okay, where you don't want to be putting anything into your stomach, well then yeah, then that's something where you'd have to do more like a water fast, because having some bone broth, well, your stomach is going to have to process that. But if you are looking for the fasting to be for metabolic flexibility, which I talked about and we talked about earlier, well, in that case, then you can do, sometimes the bone broth, or doing, for example, I did last year, I did a 8-day fast, but I did it doing like bulletproof coffee, where I put a little bit of butter and MCT oil, coffee, and yeah, yes, I had the fats, and it made it a heck of a lot easier to get through all those days. But my body was still registering being in a fasted state, meaning that I didn't spike my blood glucose. I was in ketosis, so I was burning the fat. I felt satiated. I mean, the first, like, I'd say 48 hours kind of got a little rough, but it's like after that, it was like, wow, I had a lot of energy, very focused, and I felt fine. But I mean, there is a process to it. I didn't just start off with a week fast. I mean, I worked my way up to that, where I was doing smaller, intermittent fasting. And then I was doing a 24-hour fast. Then I increased it to 48 hours. Then I did a 72. And, I just slowly kept increasing it over several months and over a couple of years until I felt that I was ready to do that. But I was very mindful, journaled the whole thing. And, I followed that very carefully. So again, it's finding out, what are your reasons to fast? And apparently from the majority of people here, that longevity and anti-aging is a major reason. So in which case, science and anecdotal evidence and clinically, we've found that being able to be metabolically flexible, to keep lean muscle mass and to put on lean muscle mass, to not lose that, contributes to longevity, to that health span. So I just think that's brilliant, how you work with your clients and the way that you walk them through and build them up for that.
Yeah, I agree. I find mental clarity is one of my impetus to fast. Other people talk about feeling fatigued or maybe even stressed and, failing to see results. Once again, we're talking about genetic makeup playing a major role in how your body responds to food deprivation. But the more you do it the right way for you, the more you're getting this metabolic flexibility going on. As Justin described, the reason for that is hormesis, the right amount, Goldilocks amount of stress for you, and you're going to see results. I did a 5-day fast at the base of Mount Shigisan in Japan with these gold robe donning monks a few years ago. I felt like that was a little too long. I went kind of a little kooky day 3 and 4. Like, I mean, we're talking green tea only. Turns out green teas, I don't know. I drink too much green tea and I get a little weird. But certainly the first 72 hours was, kind of blissful. And I'm convinced, by the way, that the theanine in green tea is one of the reasons why they're able to fast so long and meditate. That concentration of that theanine that puts you into alpha. Anyway, what an experience that was. And I have optimal variance, it just turns out, in FTO, which is fat storage, to be overly simplified, the MC4R, which is appetite control. AMY1's not optimal. That's carbohydrate digestion for me. And then ApoA2 is pretty good. So all these things impact everything from how quickly you get hungry to how efficiently your body uses fat, for energy during fasting. So let's talk a little bit. Let's unpack these genes a little bit more for folks, starting perhaps with insulin sensitivity and how the body handles carbohydrates. So those key genes are, the TCF7L2, FTO, MY1. Why does this matter, Justin? Again, just to drive it home. And then I'd like to go to you, Dr. Barton, about cortisol levels and, how fasting impacts stress, physical, mental, emotional. But starting with, the variations around how somebody might have these genetic differences and look to, somebody with poor insulin sensitivity, which versus optimal? What would be the variation in how they would fast?
Yeah, so I mean the TCF7L2 gene is so relevant when it comes to blood sugar regulation. And really, I mean, when you're fasting, one of the key things that most people are aiming for is the suppression of that insulin, right? It brings it down, and that tends to help with weight loss because when insulin is going up and down, it really operates as a storage hormone for nutrients, right? So when you eat a heavy meal, your blood sugar goes up and your pancreas releases insulin in order to sort of clear the blood glucose. If you have a suboptimal variant in TCF7L2, that mechanism is in and of itself already dysregulated, which can really complicate things, when it comes to figuring out what your best case scenario is for macronutrients. So if it is dysregulated, I'm actually of the opinion that intermittent fasting, or at least a condensed eating window, can be a pretty good tool for helping to sort of improve that mechanism. There's also, fasting mimetics, which we'll get into a little bit later tonight, which I do think also are fairly useful there. But you're going to want to be aware that, again, you need to have a dialed in plan because your body is just not insulin stable, right? So you have to have a little something in place to make sure that you're actually responding properly to the fast. And you're probably better off starting off on that smaller end, a 12 and 12, because you're going to be in a little bit of a state of shock if you jump right into a 3 to 5 day fast. It's interesting what you were saying there, Dr. Weil, about the brain fog. And some people do get that. When you do a certain amount of fasting, you actually get an elevation in BDNF as well, brain-derived neurotrophic factors. So that's another sneaky little gene that we look at because some people are dysregulated there as well. So fasting can actually help improve that mechanism, which a lot of people haven't heard of. And that's why some people, when they fast, they get this mental clarity. If you're one of the people that doesn't get that and you find that you're really foggy, to me, that's where you should add in some electrolytes in your fast because you may be depleting minerals because, once again, the insulin mechanism, one of the things that it does is it signals your kidneys to store minerals. So if we suppress insulin for long enough and you're still going to the bathroom things, you're going to be depleting a lot of those minerals. And I think that can lead to brain fog for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Or the essential amino acids is another great hack for that as well, because amino acids really create neurotransmitters, right? So if you're feeling really brain foggy, again, this is what coaches do. Let's add some amino acids in there and maybe we can negate some of the brain fog issues as well.
Yeah, awesome. And so let's say, we pair that, Dr. Varden, with, the cortisol levels you alluded to earlier and how fasting impacts stress. Genes like catechol-methyltransferase, COMT, ADRA2B, maybe even TPH2, 5-HT-TLPR, some of the genes we test for in the mood, executive behavior, and so forth, and others. And why it matters is, obviously, fasting is a mild stressor for most, but some can tolerate it better than others. So now how do we pair what Justin said about insulin sensitivity over to cortisol and stress for the right type of fasting?
Well, first, really understanding how fasting affects those cortisol and stress levels. So when you are talking about short-term fasting, okay, so we're talking 12 to 24 hours, okay, the effects on cortisol it really works in the fact that, first of all, cortisol naturally rises in the morning as part of the circadian rhythm, peaking around 8 a.m. Then what happens is fasting extends that cortisol elevation, especially when paired with caffeine or exercise, like I was drinking some bulletproof coffee. So I was extending that, into the morning. And that can actually be beneficial for fat metabolism as cortisol helps metabolize stored fat for energy. Now, when you're talking about extended fasting, now here we are saying 24 hours or longer. Okay, cortisol levels may actually stay elevated longer than usual. Now, this can be advantageous for some, fat loss, metabolic flexibility, but problematic for others. Adrenal fatigue, anxiety, high stress response. And if the stress is too high, can actually lead to muscle breakdown, sleep issues, insulin resistance. So you're really working against yourself in what you want to achieve if that is the case, because, chronic stress and over fasting, you know, they do happen. So how would we know what genes are controlling this? And Dr. Wild, you beautifully have already mentioned some. So ADRA2B, so this is the noradrenaline receptor. This works with the sympathetic nervous system. It regulates norepinephrine, that fight or flight response, and the stress desensitization. So how does fasting impact this? Well, with individuals, say you have an ID. Now, remember that this particular gene actually works as an indel, insertion or deletion. So it's not a SNP per se. And if someone has an ID, has one chromosome's inserted, one's deleted, they may experience higher stress levels and difficulty adapting to fasting. Shorter fasts or adaptogens can actually help reduce that fasting-induced stress for them. The clock gene, can never forget about circadian rhythm and cortisol regulation, these tightly linked. So the clock gene actually helps to regulate the body's biological clock, influencing those cortisol rhythms. Like I was saying, peaks more in the morning and then dips, as the day goes on. And for example, if someone is dysregulated in their clock gene, cortisol can actually stay elevated for longer period of time during that fasting, leading to the higher stress, poor sleep quality. And this really can disrupt even further their circadian rhythm. A couple others, COMT. Okay. By the way, you had already mentioned, as far as the clock gene, that can be found in the sleep system of the reports. The ADRA2B, that can be found in the mood and behavior reports. A lot of these you can actually find in different areas as well, because there's a lot of crossover. COMT you'll find in several of the reports. You will definitely see, and the way that I am referencing it, you will find in the mood and behavior report, because it is dealing with dopamine and cortisol breakdown. Because the COMT gene, the catecholomethyltransferase gene, regulates the breakdown of stress hormones like dopamine, epinephrine, cortisol. Okay, so if you have a slow COMT, like an AA variant, you could have a higher baseline stress and difficulty clearing excess cortisol. So what do? Well, avoid excessive fasting, focus on meditation, magnesium supplementation to support the COMT function. There are little tips and tricks.
Well, that's just it. That's just it. No, perfect. That's where we get back to maybe the 12 and 12. So, look, insulin sensitivity and how the body handles carbohydrates is factored in. Cortisol levels and how fasting impacts stress and how stress impacts fasting, that's factored in. I wanted to add fat metabolism, hormones. I mean, whether the body can effectively burn stored fat, genes like ApoA2. I mean, these variants that directly affect how not only we're absorbing the macronutrient when we ingest it, but how fats are metabolized, and then those with certain genotypes that are or variations that may struggle to mobilize fat during fasting, which is why the keto diet doesn't work for everybody, right? And then hormones that are related to our genes that are related to our hormone panel, and so these are all. But not to mention, by the way, ovarian function. This is the work of Dr. Mandy Peltz, and thyroid regulation, leptin signaling, and et cetera, et cetera. So this is why some people experience amazing results while others feel fatigued, sluggish. And it's, if it's informed by genomics, pathway genomics, all these genes we're talking about, you're going to have success. If you're just going to go off and try a 16-8 or a 5-day, fast with some water, maybe if you're lucky, the right sort of combo of electrolytes, not everyone's going to have the same kind of outcomes. So that's what we're getting at. We're coming up on wanting to answer some questions here, but we also promised how we talk about, how to fast smart and avoid common mistakes. So finding the best fasting strategy is related to the genomics, and it's gene inferred, it's gene informed. So the 16-8, the 24-hour, the extended fasts, the 12-12. What are you doing, right? What macros do you need to focus on? But guys, who else should be cautious with fasting? People, we talked a little bit about high stress, adrenal fatigue,
Mhm.
hormone imbalances. How about, schedule, like we don't want anyone fasting without medical supervision, but folks that are already maybe at risk for cardiovascular disease or significant, maybe gastroenteritis or issues that are on Schedule A diseases, you really have to talk to your doctor before doing any of these, regardless as to how well genetically informed they are, right? And
I
especially folks that are either experience hypoglycemia or have diabetes diagnosed, low blood sugar, or type 1, or certainly type 1, but type 2 uncontrolled. These are all people that you need to be cautious with fasting, right?
and I want to add, because I actually had a client, a couple of them like this, that you need to tread very lightly and cautiously, even to the point of not having them do any kind of fasting protocol. And these are people with dysregulated relationship with food.
Mm,
Say they were bulimic, or
yeah.
had issues with you know with food in the past. Then that's probably not such a good road to take. There's plenty of other things that can be implemented and done. So we can't, it's not just about the genes. Yes, they absolutely inform so much, but we have to take the person where they are at, what are their life experiences, because that is really what helps to paint a more full, beautiful, rich picture of who they are. So
Absolutely.
the
Yeah.
genes.
Excellent point.
And
Yeah.
then also to tailor it to the goals even further, there's always little hacks and little ways that you can do that. Like, let's say the cortisol is going to be an issue for you. Well, you can add some ashwagandha into that bulletproof coffee and help counteract the issue. Or if, let's say, the digestive component is really what you're after, you can actually utilize digestive enzymes mid fast and help to clear the microbiome that much more efficiently. Or
Yep.
if, let's say, you do have a suboptimal ApoA2 and you have difficulty with the actual breakdown of your stored fats, well, mid fast you can utilize some L-carnitine, or perhaps a ketone ester is in your interest there. Some light exercise, something to help burn through that initial glycogen so that you can tap into those fat storages and start creating ketones a little bit more efficiently. I
Yeah.
think this is a process. I think when you start, you look at it a little more simple and say, okay, I'm gonna hydrate and I'm just gonna push my breakfast back a little bit, right? Start there, and then you can sort of add the hacks and personalize and do it differently. I mean, I'm an experienced guy with this now, and I honestly do a 12 and 12, and then now and again I feel it appropriate to hit a 24. So I do that, and it's really not a stressor. Where the first time I did it, I was like, oh, when do I get to eat? Like, when is that first meal actually going to come about? So I encourage you to look at it as more of a process than something that you're going to adopt in an extreme manner right off the bat. There's just no reason to do that.
Well, what in your genes, share, you've defined your protocol. What in your genes have you identified that allowed you to, sort of, for the most part, when you're doing it, it's a 12 and 12. Because, your genes intimately, you consult a lot of folks on what that should, genetically informed should mean for them. What was it about your genetic profile that suggested 12 and 12?
So I actually am dysregulated for both FTO and MC4R. So uh, my satiety signals are just way off, and I'm also a high binder of dopamine. So the combo of those, I think, really leads to food being a particular vice for me. So I do tend to feel a little bit hangry, quote unquote, at a certain point. So I need to be able to address that to where I'm not moody around anyone. I'm just trying to get some benefits here. The
Yep.
other side to it is not actually genetic for me, it's lifestyle and tailoring it for me because I work out pretty much every day, frankly, more than I should from a genetic perspective. So there's kind of a minimum for me when it comes to protein requirements and
Of
things as
course.
well.
Well,
Right.
that's one of the most common mistakes people make. So let's talk about that a little more. Not eating enough protein, particularly losing muscle, instead of fat. And we're not talking about getting, again, too low for caloric demands. We're just talking about timing here. And some of the mimicker discussion you alluded to, So nicotinamide, oleo, spermidine, and even for that matter, HMB, and some of these, maybe refer to them as hacks. They're not really hacks. They're ensuring that you're not going to lose the muscle mass, which is your metabolic tissue and the tissue of longevity. So dive into that a little for us.
Yeah, and really they're not hacks. It's just a reinforcement, right? It's making sure that we're amplifying the upsides and that we're mitigating any downsides. And some of these hacks, like you mentioned, spermidine, I mean, that can help trigger autophagy while you're still in a relatively fed state, right? So it's a fasting mimetic. It's
Mimicker.
mimicking some of the benefits, but without the actual caloric restriction, which again, for some people, you can't do that, right? So if you're somebody who's already underweight and therefore you have to eat several meals a day just to maintain, your body mass, that's where these mimetics are very useful, right? Something like spermidine, because you can still trigger some autophagy and get those benefits, but you don't have to risk sarcopenia, just because you're not getting enough amino acids. Or you mentioned nicotinamide. I would say especially NR, right? Like the riboside is the best because it doesn't suppress sirtuins. So it upregulates the NAD pathway, which is one of the benefits of fasting, right? It does help the mitochondrial pathway. And nicotinamide riboside is one of those things that acts as an NAD precursor. So you're actually upregulating the same mechanism, but you're doing it independent of having to do these 5-day long fasts to get the same benefit, right?
Can I
So
just interject on that for a second? Because I'm not convinced that, especially for those who are on a budget, that NR, love NR. Talk to Charles Brenner, it's all NR. You talk to Dr. David Sinclair, the Harvard anti-aging clinic, it's all about NMN. I agree with you. NR is certainly seeming to trump NMN these days. But I got to say, I'm not convinced that nicotinamide riboside for this purpose is any better than D-ribose with niacinamide. I think the literature supports that. And that's, I don't know, it's got to be like a core. It's a lot more stuff to take, higher amount of like physical powder to ingest, but I think that it's achieving the same end game. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but
way cheaper. They're
yeah.
way cheaper. And yeah, you're right. It's like D-ribose is a sugar, and then you've got niacin. So you're buying B3, you're getting it a lot cheaper as well. NR, oh man, I think that the research is definitely interesting to dive into, which we have dove into it, Dr. Wild and I, on these webinars. But point being, it's a fasting mimetic, right? So you can use any of the above, but some people shouldn't be fasting a lot. And there's ways to get the same benefit via some targeted supplementation as well.
For sure. And Dr. Vard, do you have like a recommendation for minimum amount of protein? I know this has been controversy, and maybe more recently that's been lifted, typically by, folks that are worried about stressing kidneys too much on the higher end of, 1 gram per pound. But what's your recommendation? And again, for folks that are maybe on the smaller fasting window up to, let's say, a 6 to 8 hour, like an 18-6 or even a 16-8. What are your recommendations for protein? Because I think people are always confused about that.
Yeah, well, I will say that our food pyramid FDA, they recommend way too low.
Yeah.
And especially with my older clients, I mean, myself included, okay? In order to keep muscle mass, because lean muscle mass can equate to longevity. That's one of the main reasons why people are looking at fasting, but we don't want to lose that. I generally say, general easy rule of thumb to remember, 1 gram of protein per 1 pound body weight. And that may seem like a lot. Well, it is compared to, what typical recommendations are. But when you start looking at going, okay, how can I work this into a fasting? Justin had mentioned this earlier about pre-digested aminos, having the amino acids that don't contribute to caloric intake, things like MAP aminos, master amino acid pattern, perfect aminos. Was there another one? I think Kion aminos is another one. I mean, yeah, these are specific products. They're ones that I have actually used myself. They are pre-digested amino acids that your body needs for those basic building blocks in order for so many different processes in the body, which we won't dive into right now. But the fact is it's providing the body with the building blocks to also build proteins, muscle.
Mhm.
And, you know, that's a perfect way of not increasing that caloric intake. Just like you said, you know, Dr. Wild, at the beginning, that calories in, calories out, there is research and, you know, it's a thing. Okay. We can't totally toss the baby out with the bathwater with that. Yes, there's nuances, and yes, there's other things that can contribute. And so I'm not saying it's, you know, that overall, you know, that's what it is, calories, calories out, but it is a contributor. So
Yeah.
not wanting to add to that, that's a
Yep.
good way to help increase protein intake without having to eat a bunch more food.
No, and then again, one of the biggest mistakes, we're trying to cover this with respect to what folks are doing, you know, kind of most often wrong, is the lack of or the reduction in protein naturally established by the fasting and therefore shorter window of eating. You want to maintain that, and it is. You're 200 pounds as a 6-foot male. It's hard to get in 200 grams of protein in an 8-hour window. So I had to, you know, have to mention that one of the most important things not to lose muscle mass, just as you're describing, the amino acid complexes, particularly the branched chain, and leucine being one of them, and the downstream of leucine being the HMB. Justin, you and I have covered this in some detail too, as previous webinars, but beta hydroxy beta methyl butyrate, HMB, incredibly well studied to supplement, won't break your fast. You supplement with that throughout the day. And most of us need it, like most of us need creatine. That's going to come back in a big way. But that'll prevent the muscle loss. It'll prevent sarcopenia. It'll maintain that metabolic organ much better. So that's a little tip in terms of the supplementation. Top of the hour, we should probably get to some questions.
Yes.
Anne is asking, she'd like to see more information about the different types of diabetic, I guess, blood sugar imbalances folks have, and what meals need to be balanced for longer time in fasting. You know, just overnight, adrenal overload, variations of those individuals who assume in her mind are going from hypoglycemic through to some degree of pre-diabetic to metabolic syndrome to diabetes. And then she wants to hear about MCT oil, ketone supplementation. And you're asking the right question. It's loaded. You want to have a first stab at that, though, Justin?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say that there's a lot of moving parts to how that all works. I think that MCTs and ketones can certainly uh, offer an alternative fuel source in the absence of glucose, right? So that's definitely a useful thing. I think that when it comes to, you know, pre-diabetic and diabetic populations, that would definitely be in the category of people who should ease their way into fasting, right? Because that insulin mechanism is truly broken in that case, and you're sort of dependent on something to up the blood sugar all the time. I think also another moving part there is the cortisol regulation that Dr. Varden talked about, because cortisol going up mid-fast can actually cause your liver to release glucose, and your blood sugar can go up because of that as well. Right. So there's a few moving parts. That's one where you kind of have to have a coaching protocol, in my opinion, just so you can monitor it. Right. And you can make sure that you're doing it correctly. And normally a modified fast would be a better option than a pure water fast as well for that. Dr. Varden, do you have anything to add to that? Because it is a bit of a complicated question.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if someone has poor insulin sensitivity, so this would be related to the TCF7L2 gene, the SLC30A8 gene, I would focus on early time restricted eating and a low carb refeed periods. That can be helpful. And again, I'm not saying specifically for that person, because this is more of a general, you know, hypothetical with limited information. Because as Justin said, you know, anyone who does have any type of medical issue
Yeah.
has a history of, say, diabetes or insulin, you know, insensitivity, or any of these issues, they really should be working with someone who knows what they're doing, who can implement their genetic information, as well as having all of their intake information, their history, where we can work better. Because again, the genes are one piece of the puzzle, a big, wonderful piece, but still just one piece. We need to look at everything else, as well as labs and, all of, where they currently are, and if they are right to start fasting at this point.
Absolutely. Underscore again, type 1, even uncontrolled type 2, talking to your doctor. This is nothing for you to entertain, at least until that's well under control. I would say, but the good news is that for prediabetes, insulin resistance, this can help, this can reverse your condition. Individuals with prediabetes, they have they have that lack of metabolic flexibility. They have impaired glucose handling, but they can often also tolerate longer fasts with the right preparation. And of course, again, what you guys just said, prioritize low carb, high protein meals, front end, and minimize these insulin spikes. And of course, working towards promoting fat burning during the fast itself. Some of these supplements help as well. Jin, I hope I'm saying it, Jin, is asking, how can I know if my blood sugar is not dangerously low while I'm prolonged fasting? And what can I do to prevent having blood sugar and blood pressure and fast safely? I mean, I think monitoring, just as Dr. Varden was saying, I think monitoring with functional assessments is also helpful once you've established what your genes say, and looking at things like continuous glucose monitoring and simple at-home blood pressure, SFIGs, cuffs that you put on during prolonged fasting is a smart idea. Electrolyte balance, water, ensure your blood sugar is not dropping to any dangerous low levels. It's just doing some simple blood draw test if you don't want to do a continuous glucose monitor. But you want to avoid things like dizziness and, excessive fatigue, or you get into the point of confusion, or for that matter, syncope or fainting. That's a problem. So, avoid all that. Get medically supervised, folks. And we have these coaches available to you to help you out. But again, type 2, particularly uncontrolled, not a good idea. Hypoglycemia, might just throw out this, should know, is mild symptoms is that dizziness, excessive hunger, irritability. You get the shakes. You're certainly tired, brain fog. That's kind of mild. You have problems starting if you really are physically weak, or feel like you're losing coordination, or feeling faint, or it's really hard to focus. That's you want to stop and get some food in. And
Can I bring up a point about things on prolonged fasting? Again, I've done prolonged fasts, and a good thing to make sure to prevent that low blood sugar, low blood pressure, along with the wonderful things that you've already mentioned, Dr. Wild, is to make sure that during the time period that you are doing the prolonged fast, that you don't have a lot of stressful external things going on. Don't do it at a time that, say, you've got some major deadlines at work, or that you have to do some traveling. When I did my 8-day fast, I was at home. I had some work to do, but I was able to rest and relax and not overstress my body more than it was already being stressed by the fast itself. So preemptively setting yourself up for success is also the way to go.
Yeah, you don't want to be doing a work or a physical marathon, that's for sure. One of my I've done a number of the 5-day, I've never done a 7 or 8-day fast, but one of my go-tos is not even actually MCT oil. I load up on omega-3s. I actually take a high dose omega-3, which is not necessarily so converted easily into calories, but it's satiating and diversion technique. Like, you do a long fast, medically supervised, you have to know what you're doing. Stay busy, not overly busy or stressed, like you said, but you got to stay busy. And then the other thing is a thermos full of hot water. It doesn't have to be even tea, but that warmth, just in a bit of a stomach expander. That's where I've had success in the longer fasts. Mary's asking, if you don't have enough lipase to digest fat, will this affect your ability to burn fat instead of glucose? Oh, okay. So just real quick, you guys take a stab as well. The quick and quick dirty is, we're not talking about enzymes in the digestive tract having any ability to break down stored fat, two different mechanisms. I always like to revisit just really, really quickly the 449 rule, because I think people forget this too when it comes to calories. There's 4 calories per gram of protein, 4 calories per gram of carbohydrate, and then 4 calories per gram of fat tissue, 9 per gram of fat tissue when you absorb it and break it down efficiently. This works a little differently though when you've converted into stored fat and then you reallocate that on a fast. And genes factor in there. That's the A2 I was telling you about earlier. What do you guys have to add to that?
I also think that the carnitine that I mentioned is going to be a useful substrate there because it helps to sort of shuttle fat into the mitochondria so that you can really activate it a little bit better. But yeah, lipase is very useful. It's going to be more useful in terms of the fat that you would take in for digestion purposes, to Dr. Wild's point. So I'm a big fan of lipase, but I think that really, if your gallbladder is functioning properly, there's a few kind of metrics to digesting fat that you take in, but activating and really releasing fat so that it can be split and turned into energy. That's going to be a little bit more to do with your ApoA2 gene, your ability to produce ketones, as well as things like L-carnitine. So that's what I would look at. Dr. Varden, anything to add to that?
I think you guys handled that well. I mean, just if I went into anything else, it would be more into detail of what you both have said. And
Yeah,
I,
and let me just I'll illustrate this and drive this home even further with an example of extreme. If you had no lipase, that's serious dysfunction of pancreas and gallbladder and liver. But if you had zero lipase activity, you're not absorbing that 9 calorie per gram of fat in the first place. So that's the cal. Anyway, I hope that makes sense. Oh boy, it's another long question. Margarita's asking, what are the contributing factors that trigger heightened carb cravings? Very genetic. What studies indicate a relationship between sleep, chronic fatigue, carb cravings? What adjustments could be made in response to various stressors when facing fasting is practiced for various reasons in the poll, and when is fasting contraindicated? So there are a whole, we've talked about them, and in fact, contributing factors to triggered heightened carb cravings, many of which are from the executive mood and behavior side of things, stress induced, but also from TCF7L2 that controls, hormone imbalances, not just blood sugar, but even leptin and adiponectin, ghrelin, those hormone regulators from brain to digestive function, sleep, right? Microbiome, if that's imbalanced, neurotransmitter. I mean, there's so many. How do we even answer this question? Of course, there's tons of studies that link sleep, chronic fatigue, and carb cravings. Those are literally what destroys a fast, right? And then that's very genetically related. It sounds like, Marguerite, if she hasn't had her DNA 360, she's like the perfect candidate to crack the code on what is, causing potentially eating at the wrong time or eating the wrong kinds of foods.
Yeah, I would add to that as well that some people's bodies and their metabolism, if you are on, I'm not saying you are a margarita, but if you are on like the SAD diet for a prolonged period of time, I think your body can sort of forget how to make ketones in the absence of carbohydrates. And so when you stop eating carbohydrates for a period of time, I think you get some cravings there because your body's having difficulty sort of shifting between energy substrates, right? Which again, the metabolic flexibility component is very useful there. So like starting to dabble in some fasting and then maybe add in like carb cycling strategies and different things can kind of re-educate your body. Like when you hear people go on ketogenic diets, that adaptation phase that they talk about, like fat adaptation, I actually am a fan of that for most people as a short-term strategy, right? Like dabbling in a low carb diet for a little bit and just carb cycle so that your body can start to learn how to use different substrates again. And if you do that, then before long, you'll notice that your body is able to sort of trigger ketone production, and then you're a little bit less likely to have carb cravings. Ketone esters like R13-butane-diol are also pretty valuable there if you're just hungry, if you're craving carbohydrates, because you'll up your ketones easily that way, and then you'll have that other energy substrate to work with.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as she was asking about adjustments, being made, what in response to these various stressors. Well, I mean, when you're talking about sleep quality and duration, excuse me, make sure that you are giving your body time for adequate rest. Really prioritize that 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep, to help regulate the hunger hormones. And reduce those cravings. Do what you can to avoid any late night eating, control the controllables. I mean, if you do feel that hunger coming on, go dive into some of the recommendations that these brilliant gentlemen have already talked about for stress management. Excuse me. You know, start incorporating practices like meditation, deep breathing, yoga. All of these things can help manage your stress, your cortisol levels, reduce emotional eating. Find activities like physical activities that you can engage in that take you away from going to the kitchen, and wanting to open up the cupboard and, really focusing on food. Go out and do something. And then, as far as when you are eating, okay, your eating window, ensure that those meals are rich in protein, healthy fats, fiber. That helps to promote satiety, to stabilize that blood sugar. And also making sure that if you do have any deficiencies, so looking at your genetics, seeing where genetically you may not be converting particular nutrients from your foods, then making sure to help support yourself in the foods that you need that have those nutrients, but also maybe into supplementation in the forms that your genes dictate. So that way you are addressing any of those insufficiencies, deficiencies in the basic nutrients, because that will make you hungry because your cells are craving it. So feed it, but feed it smartly.
Nice. I like this question by Atul. Where in the DNA 360 report can I see if fasting works for me? Let me just start off by making a plug again for not just the DNA 360 test. That's important that everyone has that. You'll find insights into all kinds of genetic markers that help you determine how well fasting works for you. That's the topic of this evening. But there are key sections that determine metabolic health: fat storage, FTO, ApoA2 we talked about, TCF7L2, AMY1 for insulin. There's no section that says, here are your genes, here's how you fast. That's the topic of this topic of this webinar. But COMT, MC4, all these different things. But to unlock those particular insights, download the DNA app. This is you walk around in your grocery store with this personalized owner's manual, and that is indirectly now optimized for fasting success. Refer back, because all the webinars and signing up for webinars and podcasts, it's all on the app. Our DNA Digest is on the app. Eventually there'll be communities where we can talk to each other on the app. But for now, you can upload your DNA 360 or even a 23andMe or an Ancestry report. But if you don't have your DNA 360, which is amazing, it's like this is figuring out your own genetic aptitude toward the regular routine. So we don't want to say fasting insofar as the occasional. This is like working out how you should be eating on the daily, really, right? That's kind of what we're talking about here. And your genes hold the information on how to do this best. So download the app.
I do want to give out a little shout out to Atul. Hello. I actually had the immense pleasure of having a very long conversation with him a couple Christmases ago. But I do want to say, with your DNA 360, if you want to take a look and cross-reference some of these genes, that we've been talking about, going back and re-listening to this and going, oh, okay, yeah, they said, the TCF7L2 gene gene, and oh, with this particular variant, and this is what they said, and you're looking and you're trying to find it in your reports. Well, the TCF7L2, the SLC38.8 that I had mentioned earlier about insulin sensitivity, you'll find in your diet and nutrition reports. Things like the MC4R, ApoA2, again, FTO, these are in your diet and nutrition reports. The clock gene I had already mentioned is in the sleep report. COMT sprinkled throughout, but everything having to do with like the dopamine, the serotonin, these neurotransmitters that I had discussed and that we had talked about earlier, you will find in the mood and behavior reports. Now, granted, yes, they are sprinkled throughout because fasting affects all of these systems. So this is all the more that for anyone who really is interested in diving deep and utilizing the information in their genes to work into fasting, if it is good for you, what you should do about it to personalize that, please, we are here. We understand this, and we can dig out this information from all of the different reports and synthesize that for you to give you the best way for you to fast if fasting is appropriate.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you. And I just sent him a text. I hope he gets that with a very basic summary of what you're just describing. I lost my place here now. Oh, here we go. We've got a question from Mary who's asking, do you agree with Mindy Peltz that fasting snacks that do not spike insulin are fine? Apparently she used this for a 4-day fast with no problem and did get the energy surge and the mentality clarity. Thoughts, Dr. Barton?
Yeah, I would say, was your goal to get the energy surge and mental clarity? I would say, I would think yes, because you specifically mentioned that. So if you received those results and you used her techniques, then yes, then they
Nice.
work.
Sometimes the simplest answer is and I'm going to give you, here's a question and the simplest answer we've heard all night. Ready? Marie is asking, can fasting help achieve chronic disease reversal? Yes. And I'm just going to end it right there. 100%. Here's one for
Mic
you.
drop.
Yeah, Justin, Mari's asking, I lost muscle in my 72-hour fast. What amino acids or minerals do you recommend? Is there a supplement? We covered it a bit, but let's give it right to her in summary.
Yeah, so I know Dr. Varden's a fan of MAP. I think that's a great supplement. Personally, I do use Kion, the Kion, and really, it's just about having all of the amino acids that your body doesn't make on its own, right? So there's essential and there's non-essential. Non-essential amino acids mean your body makes it. Essential means you have to get it from exogenous sources. So essential amino acid supplements have all of them and in balanced ratios as well, because you need to have balance with different amino acids. And all of them are calorie free, and you can get capsules or you can get powder that you would drink that does have some natural flavoring and things like that as well. The only downside would be, for some people, having that little bit of stevia or whatever in there can trigger the odd craving in some people, where they kind of drink that and then they want to continue on. So if you're that person, maybe utilize the capsules because you won't notice it. But I use Kion and I've used it for years and I absolutely love it. And with regard to minerals, I actually did also see a question in the chat regarding Shilajit, which I think is a great source of minerals. It's the Russians call it the conqueror of mountains, and it's a cool little compound. It tastes horrific, so some people can't really use it necessarily, but it's pretty touted for testosterone boosting benefits, and it's a very dense mineral source. So I think Shilajit's cool. Your sea salts are always a great go-to there. I like Redmond. I like Celtic, Colima. Himalayan is good as well, assuming that you don't have too much iron, right? Because there is a little bit more iron content to Himalayan sea salt. So utilize that. Our friends at Beam, that's a great mineral source as well. The fulvic and humic acid, very bioavailable. It pretty much instantly hydrates you. It's got gut detox effects as well. Justin's been putting it in my hair lately. as an experiment. I had a little bit of leftover beam minerals, so I've been putting it in my scalp just to see what happens. Because there's lots you can do with minerals, right? They're cool. But yeah, check those out. Shilajit, Beam, those are all really good sources there.
Speaking of which, directly, Tom's asking about eating within an 8-hour window. He's been doing it for years, and realized how emotional eating is. Um, he never loses energy now, even though he's catching himself not eating. What would be considered enough for a 6'1", 200-pound man? And he thinks it's because he does the beam, fulvic and humic acids, and freeze-dried beef organs on the daily. So he finds that eating some complex carbohydrates as his last meal helps his joints feel looser the next morning, and wondering if there's a reason for that. Well, I think what he's got going on is sounding pretty balanced, working for him. It probably came from some trial and error. The combination of the fulvic acid, humic acid, the beef organs, there's a lot of micronutrients we can talk about there. And by the way, carb timing. Carb's not all evil. It's the ratio. It's what your genes say about it. But he's obviously, managing all kinds of different biochemical pathways that are, optimal for him. And I would say minerals are what yield not only managing inflammation, but, joints, any ground substance. But you know, as we age, it's all about managing our muscle mass, preventing that breakdown, and our joints so that we can remain flexible and we can continue to move. Right? Push, pull, jump, squat, lift, run, sometimes, and walk. So I think he's managing inflammation. I say keep monitoring, how your joints respond subjectively, and maybe consider doing some more objective testing over time. Maybe even entertain the idea of our our DNA aging test, because you're probably exuding a body that is 5 to 10 years at least younger than your age, Tom. Good for you.
We have a
Lee,
question from Margarita that that was above that got overlooked.
you know what? I just tend to, when someone's asked, and it's nothing, we come back to it time dependent, but because we answered a couple of questions from Margarita already, but happy to do that. Let's do that because we've got a few more we want to get to. And you're right. She's asking about considering the use of a daily monitoring tools to track ketosis and insulin. I mean, there's so many out there, Justin.
She's asking who should consider that. And
who? Yes, thank you.
Yeah, many people. I mean, specifically, if someone is practicing a ketogenic diet or intermittent fasting, well, that by using some of these devices, they can ensure that they're in ketosis. So, and obviously effectively burning fat for fuel, and also you want to make sure not to, or I should say, to avoid keto flu symptoms by monitoring ketone glucose fluctuations. And also you want to make sure to prevent excessive insulin spikes, which can obviously disrupt ketosis. And I mean, there are lots of different things, blood ketone meters, breath meters, CGMs, the continuous glucose monitors. But there's also individuals with insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes. This is a great way to track fasting glucose, post-meal glucose spikes, checking blood sugar stability, all kinds of things like that. But then, for individuals with metabolic syndrome, pre-diabetic, they don't want to go there. That's why they want to get into fasting or do some of these other things. Well, these devices can help track early signs of blood sugar dysregulation and help to prevent full-on diabetes, and making sure that they are keeping their insulin levels within optimal ranges. So, I mean, honestly, I would say, even at the other end, athletes, high performance individuals, the biohackers out there, this is a great way to track how the body shifts from fat to glucose metabolism, and so many other things. But I just think that I would say anyone.
I think people went a little monitoring crazy though. And I think they still kind of are. I feel like, especially if you are insulin insensitive or metabolic syndrome, you just, rely on some subject. I like there's something called a glycomark. I think that's really an advantage to test probably quarterly when you're first doing this. Is like a hidden spikes, glucose spikes missed by A1C. And it's looking at short-term fluctuations more than anything. So that helps to understand where you are over the quarterly. But like looking every day to CGM, or by the way, Justin, we have this tool that we like to talk about, which forget about CGMs and blood and insulin and all these different things can be very complex and confusing for especially the beginners. But so as to not lose muscle mass, check in with a grip strength monitor every week or 2 weeks, right? See where you are.
Dynamometer, right? That's what it's called.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can get one of these on like Amazon for $50. I think it's one of the best. If so many tests show that your grip strength is directly related to your longevity because of maintaining that muscle mass. I think it's something that people should probably invest in over CGMs and overly. I think people get obsessed with it, and then some of it doesn't even make sense. You all over social media. Let's see how this food does with my. Well, again, everyone's different genetically. It's going to spike differently and everything. So anyway.
Well, also when you consider the mood and behavior aspect, because
yeah, well, when you said earlier,
I love digging into the weeds. I like to see the data. Of course, that's just my personality. So.
I'm not saying it's not helpful, but as a clinician, that's a different thing to understand it and interpret through it. But I'm saying for the average individual, I think informed by genetics, their DNA 360 and some of the genes we're talking about tonight to understand, should they be 12-12, 16-8, 18-6, some of those, what are the types of macros and micros they should be focused on? That's super important. But then getting overly obsessed with what is their blood sugar doing, that again, unless you're type 1 or diagnosed type 2, where your doctor's asked you. And we're going to leave it off just on time with, well, let's just answer this real quick from Lee, who's asking, well, what are genes best for fasting benefits? So we did talk about them. Please revisit the webinar at length. But Justin, do you want to just ramble this out again for Lee? Just, which gene variations are optimal for the longer haul, I guess, is what she's asking.
Yes. So if you have optimal APOA2, that's lipid metabolism, TCF7L2, that would be insulin, MC4R, that is satiety at the level of the palate, FTO, that's satiety at the level of the gut. There's also the dopamine pathway, COMP-DRD2. There's the noradrenaline pathway, ADRA2B. What did I miss? There's AMY1, starch metabolism, C30A8, which would be fasting glucose, zinc transport as well. I think that's it. Clock for your what do they call it?
Circadian rhythm.
Circadian was the word I was looking for. Thank you, Bryce.
And then Dr. Varden, you want to talk to Mary about what spermidine is?
Well, spermidine is actually a fasting mimicking compound that enhances autophagy, fat metabolism, and longevity. It really is a very interesting substance. It's actually found in natural foods, aged cheese, mushrooms, fermented foods like natto, miso, tempeh, kimchi, things like that. Organ meats, whole grains, green peas, spinach, broccoli, things like that. But really, it helps to mimic fasting by activating that autophagy, that self-eating, the cellular clearance. And it really, it makes the practice of intermittent fasting, it helps to enhance that, even when you're not necessarily fasting. So that's it in a nutshell.
Fun time, guys. Like always, yes. I knew this would be a good one. A lot of rich information, and share with family and friends, folks. These live on online. Thank you to everyone joining us this evening. And of course, like any health strategy, it always works best when it's personalized to your body's unique needs. That's the DNA 360. It's where real progress starts. Your unique operational guide. And when you're understanding what fuels you from the world of macro and micronutrients and fasting, and what hinders you, This is all about optimizing every single choice you make informed by your genes. And again, you don't have to figure it out all alone. We have amazing coaches at the DNA company who can guide you through this. There's the DNA app that's here to help, which is your coach in a phone now. So that's been launched through Apple app on the iPhone and through Android as well. So download the app, get customized recommendations based on your DNA. And as always, stay curious and stay empowered. And we'll see you next time on your health journey. Don't forget to download the app, everybody. It's an amazing tool. Help take care and control your future self today. Thanks so much, guys. Justin, Dr. Varden, always a pleasure.
Thanks for joining.
Have a great night.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.